In the early 1900s, residents of a small town planned to turn a profit on intricate cave systems in the area. Someone was bound to become reckless, someone like Floyd Collins. After he entered the cavern, it didn't take long for him to inspire eye-catching headlines for the nation to devour. But not many had Collins' best intentions in mind.
Hello, wonderful people. I'm Scott Leffler for WonderBot. Today's video is about
Man who gets trapped in a cave turns into a bewildering media sensation.
Before we begin, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos.
The Mammoth Caverns of Cave City, Kentucky offered explorers a maze-like experience. With sharp, icicle-like rocks hanging from the tops of large chambers, it was a natural wonder to behold. Because of poor soil, residents saw the success of the Mammoth Caves as a financial opportunity. During the Kentucky Cave Wars, neighbors fought to turn cave tunnels on their property into an entry route for the Mammoth system. Locals even hired actors to pose as policemen and divert potential explorers from one location to another. It was around this time that Floyd Collins wished to make his mark. Collins had discovered Crystal Cave. The system is family-owned, but it hardly made much money. Frustrated and wishing for success, Floyd Collins hatched a risky plan. Sand Cave was an unexplored system that Collins knew existed on another property. His plan was to head inside and search for an alternate route that could lead into the famous Mammoth Cave. He was confident in his plan. After owner B. Doyle agreed to share the profits, Collins set off. But he ignored crucial rules for spelunking. He went alone. He brought only one light source, he didn't dress properly, and no one knew his plan. After widening a passageway he'd been working on during the prior few days, Collins made his way through a 150-foot descent. The space was hardly ideal, twisting at odd angles, but he persisted. The passage opened into a chamber, but exploring it put him on a countdown. The fuel in his kerosene lamp was nearly used up. On his way back up the passageway, he knocked over his lamp and plunged himself into total darkness. Collins struggled to continue on. A wrong move led to the collapse of a small boulder which pinned his foot. Unable to free himself in the narrow space, all he could do was hope someone would find him sooner rather than later. After 24 hours, Collins was finally discovered by locals who had organized a search party, but they could do little for the explorer. When Collins' brother, Homer, learned about the situation, he rushed over. Armed with food and coffee for his sibling, Homer did his best squeezing down the twisted passageway. Once he saw his brother was in fairly good spirits, Homer returned with a crowbar and tried to free him from the boulder, but it didn't work. Soon the amount of locals that attempted to enter the passageway dwindled. The tight and claustrophobic space was demanding. A new strategy was needed. A reporter from Louisville named Skeets Miller arrived with a plan. Thanks to his smaller frame, Miller got to Floyd with ease. The reporter even managed to free debris around the trapped man and expose the pinned leg. The two bonded as more attempts were made to release Collins' leg. When interviews between Miller and Collins went out, the local crisis switched into a national one. Everywhere, newspapers picked up the story, and the radio sensationalized it further. Reporters, eager for their own scoop, descended upon Cave City. Souvenir shops offered tokens related to Collins' plight. Food and drink stands popped up. The poverty-stricken town was doing all it could to make a profit, while Collins remained trapped beneath their feet. Floyd Collins' health deteriorated as the days went on. On the fifth day, the attempts by locals to free him led to another cave collapse. Collins' voice was all they had left to guide him. The state of Kentucky brought in a more professional crew to help, but professional didn't mean experienced. The process was tedious and backbreaking for those involved. Heavy machinery failed to help, and picks and shovels were slow. On the 18th day, the crew finally spotted Collins, but he was lifeless. It was 2 more months until Homer finally retrieved the body. Even then, Floyd wouldn't rest peacefully for long. When the family sold their land, a local dentist bought it. Crystal Cave became Floyd Collins Crystal Cave. And to add more morbidity to the gimmick, Floyd's body was dug up and presented in a coffin in the cave. The Crystal Cave system finally closed in the 1980s. Only then was Floyd's body buried for a final time. His headstone bared an inscription that offered some dignity: "The greatest cave explorer ever known." Sadly, Collins' legacy may have inspired some other reckless outdoorsmen. The Alaskan wilderness offers unparalleled natural beauty for all manner of hikers, hunters, and fishermen. But if you can believe it, throngs of explorers are visiting a strange site there, an abandoned bus. Granted, many have come to regret it. The most hardcore pilgrims even camp out in the wreck, transforming it into a shelter for days at a time. So why are these adventurers investing so much time and money to visit a vehicle that belongs in a scrapyard? We have Chris McCandless to thank for that. Since he first made headlines in 1992, legions of fans fell in love with his mission and set out to carry on his work. He was the type of hero nobody ever saw coming. In some ways, he was just like any other guy in his early 20s, except he had a secret. With his graduation from Emory University rapidly approaching, Chris devised some very unorthodox life goals. He wanted nothing to do with the distractions and corruption of mainstream society. Chris planned to run off and embrace a free life in the wilderness, though he feared his family would try and stop him, so he didn't say a thing. Chris disposed of his old life surprisingly swiftly. To cut all financial ties, he donated his life savings to charity and shredded his credit cards. From there, he adopted the pseudonym Alexander Supertramp and headed west. He wandered through the Southwest, sometimes with fellow travelers, before making his way up to Alaska. There, he wandered through the rugged Stampede Trail alone. But when he came across the ruins of an old bus, he thought he'd found home for good. By that point, nobody had heard from Chris for months. Careful not to give away too much information, he'd send the occasional postcard. However, Chris's isolation ended when a group of moose hunters wandered into his camp. They weren't terribly interested in the bus, except that a foul odor was coming from the wreck. Tragically, they found Chris dead. The panicked hunters called the police immediately, though it was clear the man had clearly passed away weeks before. Chris's journal revealed that he survived an impressive 113 days alone in the Alaskan bush. But the struggle for survival eventually overwhelmed him. Doctors speculated that he either starved slowly due to lack of fat in his diet, or that he consumed a poisonous plant. Few people would have heard about Chris's rise and fall in the wilderness if not for John Krakauer. The journalist first covered the story for Outside before adapting it into the bestseller Into the Wild. Chris only became more of a legend from there. In 2007, Sean Penn adapted the book into an acclaimed film, starring Emily Hirsch. It painted Chris as a modern romantic hero, and audiences from all over fell in love with his story. Some even sought to recreate it. With these cultural depictions gaining so much traction, Chris's shelter, now nicknamed the Magic Bus, became a mecca of sorts. Adventurers from all kinds ventured out to visit the site, but many got more than they bargained for. Take, for example, Peter Markelau and Veranka Nikonova. These newlyweds from Belarus decided to retrace Chris's route for their honeymoon in 2019. The trip seemed like a dream come true, until they reached the Teklanika River. This current became dangerously swift during the summer months, once stranding Chris himself when he tried to turn back toward civilization. When the two Belarusians attempted to cross it, the icy waters swept Veranka away. The young bride didn't survive the journey, and she's far from the only McCandless acolyte to perish in Alaska. Accidents have befallen a number of other travelers, and even successful rescue attempts aren't exactly happy endings. Each year, the Alaskan government has sent out full-scale search parties to track down lost hikers. State taxpayers ultimately end up paying the cost of these pricey efforts, which often include search helicopters. Many are understandably fed up. Craig Medred called for this senseless hero worship to end. The journalist trashed Chris's saga, suggesting that he was little more than an entitled idiot who brought about his own demise. Now, according to Craig, other fools are just following him to their doom. Jim Gallion, an electrician who was the last person to ever see Chris alive, reluctantly agreed that Chris set a poor example. Though not as harsh as Craig, he remarked that Chris was dramatically underprepared for the bush. He was impressed the kid lasted as long as he did. However, these disastrous treks did end when the state finally removed the McCandless vehicle from the wilderness. Authorities are finding fewer tragically abandoned campsites, and they consider that a big win. Still, accidents do happen out in Alaska. Amelia Milling may be deaf, but she's always up for a challenge. Indeed, the Tennessee native attended the Rochester Institute of Technology in upstate New York and constantly pushed herself to do the extreme, sometimes the very extreme. In the summer of 2017, for instance, Amelia spent time hiking through and camping in the gorgeous national parks offered out west. Nothing too serious, however. In 2018, though, she planned to outdo herself. On June 19, 2018, Amelia packed her bags, including an emergency tracker device her mother insisted she bring, and headed to the Chugach State Park, an expanse of Rocky Mountain and serene rivers about 30 miles east of Anchorage, Alaska. There, she hiked on her own along winding mountain paths, which she noted taxed her far more than she'd expected. As a southerner, she hadn't considered there'd be snow still in June, so she changed her plans. On the second day of her trip, she descended into Eagle River Valley. Just 4 miles into the hike, her walking sticks snapped in two. She slid for 300 feet, smashed into a boulder, then fell another 400 feet down a snowy, gradual slope. The 21-year-old ended up bleeding and broken, looking up at the mountains, a very dramatic moment. Facing death, the only thing she could think of was that her dream vacation was over. Then she saw something terrifying. A wolf appeared out of nowhere and watched her in her state of weakness. Hardly able to stand and with no one around, she stood no chance against a wolf. But then she noticed something around the animal's neck that gave her relief. What she thought was a wolf wore a bone tag that read "Crow Pass Guide" along with an address. It was then that she knew that this was no wolf, but a white husky named Nanook. He'd come to rescue her. "Nanook gave me the motivation to get up and walk," Amelia said. So she did just that. With the white husky at her side, she walked back to the trail. When night fell, she set up a tent and invited Nanook inside. The dog declined. But the dog didn't go anywhere. "I realized he really was sticking with me when he greeted me in the morning when I unzipped my tent," Amelia said. "He'd stayed the entire night next to me. He offered more help too." Along the trail, Amelia and Nanook encountered the Eagle River crossing, a roiling, swirling, and freezing point in the river. Amelia tried to cross it twice. On the second time, she slipped and the water pulled her under. After 15 minutes caught in the swell, Amelia bolted back toward the shore. Nanook had grabbed her backpack and pulled her to safety. Afraid of hypothermia, Amelia curled up into her sleeping bag. There, Nanook kept licking her face. In fact, he licked her face until she remembered the emergency tracker her mother made her take on the hike. When prompted by Nanook, she activated it, sending alerts to the Alaska State Troopers. Several hours later, trained rescue workers descended on her location in a helicopter before scooping the miserable Amelia and her canine companion up. Rescuers brought Amelia to an Anchorage hospital. When Amelia recounted her story, the troopers were floored. Nookie was nothing short of a modern-day Lassie hero, one rescuer, Alaska State Trooper Lieutenant Eric Olson, said. Inspired by the pooch, Lieutenant Olson personally brought the dog home. There, the trooper met Scott Swift, Nanook's owner. When he heard what the dog had been up to for the past 24 hours, "I was definitely pretty floored," he said. "It sends chills up my spine when I think about it. I certainly didn't train him to do anything like this." Scott continued, "It's a pretty powerful feeling that this dog has had instinctual ability to want to help people." The state of Alaska recognized that too and gave Nanook a special honor for his work. For his heroics, Nanook was made an honorary Alaska State Trooper. The free spirit dog would no doubt look good in uniform. Amelia couldn't have been happier for her savior. Amelia recovered in Anchorage and actually continued the dream vacation she once had thought would end violently. She did, however, take plenty of time from hiking to spoil Nanook with lots and lots of treats. Amelia was extremely lucky to have Nanook come to her rescue. In a wild region like the Alaskan wilderness, Having a loyal companion to get you through can be a critical factor for survival. And that's definitely the case when it comes to the brutalist of climates, Siberia. 4-year-old Karina Chikatova lives in a remote Siberian village in the Far East region called the Sakha Republic. There, she shared a small home with her father, mother, grandmother, and her dog, Nadia. Like most kids her age, Karina was energized by a youthful curiosity that urged to explore and know and understand, which was why in July 2014 she followed her father, Rodion, on an expedition into a part of the Siberian wilderness also known as the taiga. Now, this decision was problematic for a few different reasons. The first reason being that the taiga is very much an animal kingdom dominated by bears, tigers, and wolves with really sharp teeth and an appetite for people. The second problem with Karina's decision was that she had not told her grandmother, the person charged with watching her at the time, that she would be following her dad into the bear-infested wilderness. In fact, she hadn't even told her dad that she'd be following him. So literally no one on the planet knew that this 4-year-old girl was diving headstrong into the most dangerous territory on the planet. Well, no person at least. Karina did have a companion at her side, Nadia, the family dog. That evidently was all the comfort the little girl needed. But it was little comfort to her mother, Talina, when she realized her little girl and the dog were both missing. At first, Talina figured her youngster and the dog followed Rodion to his native village. But Siberia wasn't exactly flooded with quality LTE, so she couldn't pull out a cell phone and check. Instead, she waited to hear from her husband. In the meantime, Karina followed her father until she somehow managed to lose his trail. Her dad disappeared from view, leaving her very much stranded in Siberia with Nadia, and the bears, and the wolves. It took 4 days of waiting for Mother Talina to learn that no, her daughter was not with her husband in his home village. No stranger to Siberia, she understood this to be a very bad thing. So she alerted authorities. They deployed a 100-person rescue team to head out into Siberian wilds to find her. The team carried rifles to fend off bears. Yeah, there were that many bears in the woods. Helicopters sliced the sky and rescue workers on foot combed through the trees and tall grass. But their search proved fruitless. Karina was nowhere to be seen. But then, 9 days after she went missing, authorities found a clue. More specifically, a clue walked right up to the authorities and introduced herself. Nadia returned home, but Karina wasn't with her. What should have been a hopeful moment only seemed to confirm Talina's worst thoughts. If she was to hug her puppy, Talina said, we thought this would have given her a chance to survive. So when her dog came back, we thought, that's it. Even if she was alive and the chances were slim, now she would have definitely lost all hope. But Nadia hadn't just wandered absent-mindedly home. She seemed eager to show the desperate family and the rescue crew something important. The dog headed the group of rescuers and led them into the wilderness. The dog led authorities to a spot in the wilderness, but none of them saw Karina there. Nadia, it seemed, couldn't find the exact area where she'd left the little girl. Authorities wondered if they were anywhere near her at all. But 3 days later, 12 days after Karina first went missing, rescue workers spotted a child-sized footprint on a riverbed beside a dog's paw print. The footprint revealed Karina was barefoot, a crucial detail for investigators. This told rescue workers that Karina likely was not in the woods. Too many sharp sticks there would have been a nightmare on her feet. This narrowed their search down considerably, and the following morning they executed a new search plan. And sure enough, just 20 meters from where they started searching, one rescue worker noticed a peculiar lump tucked away in a patch of tall grass. The whole crew rushed over. They found her nestled in the grass. She was starving, thirsty, exhausted, and covered in mosquito bites, but nevertheless alive. They brought her tea before carrying her to a car and whisking her away to the nearest hospital. The child spent some time in the hospital, but physicians determined that there wouldn't be any lasting damage. A psychologist examined her mental state and found, shockingly, her mind was in a good place. Talk about mental fortitude. So how did a 4-year-old girl survive in the Siberian wilderness? The little girl told reporters and her family that she survived off wild berries and river water. Then, of course, there was Nadia, the lovable canine that gave her warmth at night and companionship in the daytime. The two reunited for the first time back at home when the hospital released Karina. The meeting didn't go as expected. When Karina first saw her dog, she looked her in the eyes and chided, "Why did you leave me?" Those 3 days of solitude must have really affected the little girl. But eventually she came to understand what the dog did for her. "It was Nadia who rescued me," Karina said sometime later. "I was really scared, but when we were going to sleep, I hugged her and together we were warm." Karina's story gripped everyone watching, and locals even erected a statue of the girl and her pooch to celebrate their strength and will to survive. Not bad for a 4-year-old and her dog, huh? In the end, Karina made a full recovery, and by 2018 attended a ballet boarding school 350 miles away from the village she'd wandered away from all those years ago. Her teachers believed she had the talent to compete in Russia's competitive ballet scene. When she just started her classes, Karina was very reserved, a boarding school leader said. "She's changed so much and became a lot more open, sociable, friendly, and independent. She made many friends who love her lots." But even as she danced like an expert and earned friends with her exuberant personality, she would never forget the friend that made it all possible, Nadia, the loyal canine.